thank P.S. Barney for coming here and that very, very informative talk. Thank you for coming to the U.S. Embassy today. Thank you all for coming to the U.S. Embassy. Really, really happy to be here with you. Before I begin, as I was sitting here listening to P.S. Barney and learning Pidgin, it occurred to me something I wanted to talk about what makes the MCC Threshold program different than everything else I've ever worked on. Now, I've worked on projects for the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, USAID, for the United Kingdom, for Italy, for Australia. There is something that's, in all of my experience in 27 countries over 20 years, there's something different about this project. And that was demonstrated by P.S. Barney right now. I have never worked with a host nation counterpart, with somebody at the level of P.S. Barney, who could describe in detail what a development project is designed to do. He just described what ALTIP does better than I could. And I've never worked anywhere where that's true. Every other project I've worked on, the relationship has been one where the host nation says, okay, report to us back every 3 months, or report to us every 6 months. But they aren't really involved in the project. In many ways, in the way ALTIP is structured, the way the Threshold program is structured, P.S. Barney is really my boss. He and other people in the Solomon Islands government direct ALTIP. And I'm here to make sure that that direction happens. And that's a fascinating, fascinating change from anything I've ever worked on. And I hope he would agree with me. I'm curious to, hopefully one of you will ask him that question afterwards, and I'd be curious to know if he sees a difference as well. First, let me get back to what I was going to say. Most of you have probably not heard of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We are a small development agency inside of the United States government, somewhat like USAID, but we're different, in part because we're much, much smaller. We only work in 18 countries right now, as opposed to USAID, which probably works in, I'd say, at least 120, I don't know the number. Budgetarily, USAID is more than 60 times larger than MCC. And MCC partners with countries in a very different way. First, there is a quantitative analysis of whether or not a country is ready to accept development assistance in the way the MCC provides it. There is a scorecard of 20 individual metrics that MCC reviews every year. And if a country does well enough on this scorecard, it's very much like going to school. If a country does well enough on that scorecard, then the MCC decides whether or not it will partner with the country. In this case, MCC decided in 2018 that the Solomon Islands was ready to partner. As P.S. Barney mentioned, the agreement wasn't signed until last year, but we all know that between 2018 and 2022, something happened in the world that slowed many, many things down. So the decision to partner with the Solomon Islands was made in December 2018. The project only was signed off and started in January 2022. In that period of time, there was a discussion between the MCC and the Solomon Islands government about how the MCC could best help the Solomon Islands and the Solomon Islands government generate greater revenue in order to reduce poverty here. And one of the two ways was helping with tourism. I'm not going to go through all the reasons and all of the limitations of tourism here. land and access to land is an incredibly limiting problem. And so Altic was structured in a way that would help to make more sites attractive to tourism investment, and in a way that is responsive to the reality of life here in the Solomon Islands and your land tenure. I've worked in a lot of countries. My first job after law, I'm a lawyer by training. My first job after law school was working with American Indian tribes, and American Indian tribes have land tenure very similar to the land tenure here in the Solomon Islands. I've seen the difficulty that causes investment, and I've seen the ways, legally at least in the United States, that we have sought to minimize that and sought to allow a country and its people to utilize land to generate revenue. But I want to stress something in addition to what the PS talked about in terms of how ALTIF and MCC works. This is a true partnership with the government. There is an agreement, a grant agreement, that is available, and I could provide you. It was signed by Minister Ramafafia and the head of the MCC that talks about how all of this will be implemented. And you can see it, and this is unlike anything I've ever worked on. Every person in the Solomon Islands can review the contract or the grant agreement between the MCC and the Solomon Islands government and exactly how all of this will be implemented. And this talk here today, the involvement of officials of the Solomon Islands government who can talk with knowledge about the program, where it came from, what it is doing, and where it will go, is as I said earlier, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, is the unique factor about the Threshold program versus an MCC versus every other donor that I've worked for. There is a hope, and I will tell you, there's a hope among people in the Solomon Islands government that the relationship between the Solomon Islands and the MCC will progress to another stage. This is called a threshold program. A threshold means first step. MCC has a second type of agreement with a host nation. It's called a compact. A compact has significantly more funding attached to it, hundreds of millions of dollars. The threshold program is 20 million US dollars. Compacts are hundreds of millions of US dollars, and they're utilized to invest in infrastructure. The regional example I like to use is that of Vanuatu. There was a compact in Vanuatu approximately 10 years ago in which the MCC paid for the ring road. Everybody's sort of forgotten this, no one knows who built it, because MCC is terrible at branding things and letting people know what we did. But if you go to Vanuatu, I haven't, so congratulations if you have. If you go to Vanuatu, there's a road that was built with a compact with the MCC. We've also recently entered compacts with Indonesia, with Timor-Leste, and hopefully in a few years we will do one with the Solomon Islands. And if this succeeds, and I think it's looking like it will succeed, that hope will become a reality. Other than that, I just want to say that I'm very thankful that I'm here in the Solomon Islands again. I'm sorry I don't speak Pidgin. I really enjoy listening to it. And someday, hopefully in 3 years, I will be able to sit here and speak to you in Pidgin. I've lived here before. I've said this to those of you who were at the Tourism Solomons event a few weeks ago. I said, I lived here in the past. I worked here for the Australian government in 2015 and 2016 for 2 years. As I mentioned earlier, I've worked in 27 countries. This is the only country I've ever come back to work. This is the only country that I've loved, my wife has loved, and my son, to the extent he remembers that time, have loved enough to come back to. So I'm really, really happy to be back here. I really hope that ALTIF and FOVEP, the other project in the Threshold program, are successful because, as P.S. Barney outlined, they will have an impact on communities in the Solomon Islands and the people who live within them. So thank you all very much for coming again, and now I think we're going to do questions.